Hello friends, this is Govan here. Just a heads up in advance, this video is going to be of a spiritual and metaphysical nature, so if that's not your thing, just wanted to let you know that. More and more I'll be covering these types of topics on my channel, so more or less will come to be expected. The idea or concept of Tulpas or Egregores, technically the same thing, just different traditions, and there's other traditions that call these things by different names. Those are the two that I can think of at the moment. And what it essentially is, just to give a rough idea of what that means, is to create a thought form usually in the form of a separate entity, and giving it enough creative or imaginary power that you sort of build it up over time, that it becomes an independent being. So by spiritual definition, it would actually have its own sentience and would be separate from you. However, ideally you maintain control over it, so it's not something that you create and then release off into the world to do its own thing. In this video I'm going to just discuss more or less how to create one safely and properly, and just the few roles that it can play and sort of the guidelines and ideas around it. I don't want to get too general in what I'm going to cover on it. I want to keep it to these things, and if there's future videos on this topic, I can get more in depth into the details of that. So the idea that you would create something external from yourself is one that sort of operates under the belief that thoughts are things. So whether it's various myths from religious texts that have given us ideas of these, or if it's, these myths or stories about the creation of beings, even in the physical form where they would be given life. There was the golem from don't know if it's in the Bible or not. I just know that there's some story with the golem that gets given life. To be honest, I'm not that interested in some of those traditions, so it's not something that it probably is from the Bible for all I know. I think it was a Jewish tradition, or it was some Jewish word that would be put on the forehead of this thing, and that would give it life. And the idea was that when the creator of the golem added a letter to the word, it meant death, or it spelt out death. So the first word was the golem's name or something, and then the second part of the word, it was what would cause it to crumble and turn back into clay. That is an example of a very old esoteric story. Obviously we have no idea if it was true or not, but these types of things exist. Another popular one is an idea in Buddhism where someone just started working with a meditation. Some sort of Western practitioner of probably Western magic who went to study there, and as the story goes, they imagined this person, or like a little Buddha, and over time it became more and more detached than just an imaginary friend, and eventually the person showed up in real life and it matched the features that they had imagined in meditation for a period of time. So if you were to consciously create an egregore or a tulpa, you'd ideally want to have certain things that you're setting out from the get-go. So intention, time limit. You don't just want to create this stuff and let it do its own thing for forever. You want to keep it within certain constraints, because you are creating something that's separate from you, and you have some responsibility for it, and you have responsibility for what it does, and if it starts doing unsavory things out in the world, that could impact you. It could trace its way back to affecting you in certain ways, or it could actually even directly interfere with your life if it holds some sort of grudge against you for whatever reason. So the ideal way to go about this is to, in a magical journal, keep track of the day that you're creating it, the day that it's automatically going to be destroyed. I almost always correlate this with various astrological events, whether it's just the moon phases, or equinox and solstice, or any other sort of rise and fall of any kind of cycle. And that can be a good thing if you match it up with the intention of what you're creating it for. You just kind of have to know the energy and vibe of different cycles, and whatever the intention is going to be for your egregore, you match it up with something that's like that. So if you were going to be creating something for personal protection, you might want to create it at the start of or during an Earth-based astrological sign. So Taurus or any of the other Earth-based ones would be an example of that. Another thing that you really want to do before actually doing the ritual, create it, is to clearly lay out what it is you want it to accomplish. So this is being very clear in your mind. Do not just have it as an open general thing. You want to give it clear instructions. This is like creating, almost imagine if you had a robot and you were programming it. You might give it AI, but it's still going to have a set of guidelines that it's going to be following, that it's going to be used for. There's going to be definitely longer term times when you want something more intelligent to be able to do and accommodate certain scenarios. So if you had something that you were designing for protection, for personal protection on a spiritual or mental plane, you'd want it to have a really good awareness to deal with whatever incoming threats might be coming your way. Next up, you also want to decide what you're going to charge it with. This can be very wide-ranging. You could simply create something as a thought form, such as you just imagine the energy from your environment, or even giving your own energy. It's less desirable than the energy from your environment, obviously. Coming in and forming this being, taking its shape, and really, seeing all the different features that would come about in it, and see its size, its shape, its texture, its color, etc., and give all those attributes. But if you're proficient in working with them, you can create it or charge it with any of the elements: earth, water, air, fire, ether. You could also create it and feed it, because you also want to keep these things maintained through regular contributions or charging. You can do that through incense, almost like you would any deity. You can charge it with any other kind of offering, like food or drink. Obviously, after you've done that, you don't want to eat that food or drink. You want to put that into the ground, dispose of it, because that's essence of that has been consumed and used by that entity. Same thing goes when you do that contribution for deities. And I guess one thing to also mention, because I'm talking about deities there, is you want to differentiate when it would be good to use a deity and when it would be good to use an egregore or a tulpa. The idea of an egregore or tulpa is that it's never going to be able to exceed your own abilities unless it becomes something totally separate and develops on its own path. But ideally, you don't want to let it get that out of hand, and you don't necessarily need to have them that long. So if you had something that you created, and as a practitioner you had, say, some sort of healing ability, you were a proficient hands-on healer or a Reiki practitioner, it's very likely that you could imbue that skill within that entity. You probably wouldn't be able to create an entity that could knock over bookcases if you yourself can't knock over bookcases with your mind. But if we're talking about deities from various traditions, we generally sort of pay homage to and invoke or evoke those beings because they have attributes and qualities that we haven't attained in ourselves. So that's almost like an inspiration for us, or we're asking for their help in some way to influence our environment or, again, ourselves in some way. That being said, in Egregore and Tulpa, where its benefits lie is that it's much more compliant. You can, tell it what to do. You can give it exact instructions, and it's only devoted to you. It's not some larger-than-life thing out there that is got this massive influence, and so you're free to do what you want with it without external judgment if what you're asking it to do isn't in line with what that deity you wanted to do would normally do. So generally, if you're creating something like this, you have the day you create it, and you want to have very regular intervals with how you charge it. Because it's through the repetitive imagination of it, or imagining of it, that you reinforce its existence and make it more effective in what it's doing. So whether it's daily, every other day, specific days of the week, once a week is a little on the lacking side of things in terms of not having enough time, but it really depends on how quickly you're wanting it to do whatever tasks you're setting it out to do, and how big or important the task is, how frequently it needs to do it, etc. You can bind this entity to objects. You can just have it created as a thought form, and you have to, say some sort of word in your mind, whether it's another language or English or whatever. You could say the word out loud. You could have it associated with various mudras that you create with your hands, so hand gestures. You can have it connected and associated and almost like bound to certain body postures that you have to hold when you create it. That seems a little impractical in my opinion, but there's a lot of ideas around how certain body postures affect something that builds over time. You just think about Qigong. Sometimes people wonder, like, how is just holding this posture good for my health? Well, if you have certain associations with this posture and you build up that good feeling over time, then as soon as you get into that posture, that good feeling just comes back because you've been, like I was saying, building that effect up over time. So the same idea, if you have something unique that you do, it could even be a whole ritual that you've designed or created. By doing that and creating like a pattern that over time you reinforce, then it becomes something that as soon as you do that, that feeling, whatever you attach to it, whether it's an idea or an actual being or any kind of effect, is going to happen over time if it's repeated properly, better and better every time, and with more force and more presence. And lastly, just to reinforce the idea of having a time that something's destroyed, you don't need to have these things going on endlessly. It's ideal not to, just in case they do get out of hand. And if you have that inbuilt into it, then even if you forget about it, when that day comes around, that creation will just dissolve back into the universe, or into whatever it was you created it out of. And that's really important. Like I said before, you can attract stuff to yourself that you don't want if it's doing undesirable things on your behalf. So I hope you found this video interesting and helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And with that, I'll talk to you next time.